Paper egg cartons are almost entirely made of empty space. Bury one torn up in packed soil, and the physical space it creates does not disappear when the paper eventually rots away. Every single week, millions of gardeners carry a stack of empty paper egg cartons out to the recycling bin without a second thought. You look at them as a cheap, single-use transport vessel designed only to get breakfast from the grocery store to your refrigerator safely. The standard, conventional advice tells you that if you want to use them in the garden, you should toss them on the surface of the compost pile where they will eventually break down over a year. But when you relegate them to the dry surface of a compost bin, you're actively throwing away a highly advanced structural engineering tool. The time spent managing these problems is wasted if the underlying structure is constantly ignored by the gardener. If you have hard, severely packed soil, the kind of dense, heavy clay dirt that literally bends a steel trowel and causes water to run off instantly in sheets, those discarded egg cartons are the exact physical intervention your ground is desperately begging for. Deep-rooted crops like tomatoes, peppers, and carrots will immediately stunt and fail in these conditions because their tap roots cannot punch through the concrete-like barrier. The fundamental problem with compacted soil is a total, devastating absence of internal void space. The heavy mineral grains, the microscopic plates of clay, and the jagged edges of sand have been crushed together by heavy foot traffic, pounding seasonal rains, or poor land management, aggressively squeezing out all the atmospheric air and leaving no physical room for water to penetrate or roots to travel. When soil reaches this state, it essentially ceases to function as a living ecosystem and instead behaves exactly like a paved asphalt parking lot. It becomes a hostile environment where biology cannot survive. You cannot solve this deep structural collapse by sprinkling a thin layer of fine compost on top of the crust. You have to physically force the crushed grains apart. You need to insert a rigid wedge directly into the earth, and plain, molded paper fiber is one of the most effective, biologically active wedges you can possibly find in your home. It is crucial to note that you must skip any egg carton made of plastic or styrofoam. Those are toxic pollutants that will never break down and will actively harm your soil biology. This biological wedging technique only works with plain, undyed paper cardboard cartons. The cellulose is the key. Without the cellulose, there is no biological trigger, and without the molded shape, there is no physical wedging action. You must have both. If you try to do this with flat cardboard, the heavy clay will just press it flat, sealing the gap. You need the structural geometry of the carton to fight back against the weight of the earth. In a garden, geometry is destiny. The shape of the organic matter determines how the soil reacts to it. The three-dimensional cups of an egg carton are nature's perfect temporary scaffolding. To truly understand why the humble egg carton is so structurally powerful, you have to look closely at exactly how it is manufactured in the factory. Fibrous, molded cellulose is fundamentally, structurally different from the smooth, flat, corrugated cardboard used for shipping boxes. A standard cardboard shipping box is pressed tight, heavily glued, and chemically designed to aggressively repel moisture and maintain a flat, rigid plane. But a paper egg carton is made by taking raw, recycled paper fibers, suspending them in a liquid slurry, and vacuum forming them into a complex, three-dimensional geometric shape. The resulting material is porous, highly absorbent, and surprisingly weakly bound together. It is an intricate, chaotic web of microscopic paper fibers actively wrapping around pockets of trapped atmospheric air. The distinctive geometry of the carton, the deep cups, the raised cones, the rigid structural ridges, is specifically designed to prevent crushing. When you deliberately tear an egg carton into jagged pieces and bury those pieces vertically deep into dense, compacted soil, you're introducing a foreign, highly structured architecture into a very hostile, collapsed environment. The rough, aggressively cupped shapes of the torn carton refuse to lay flat under the weight of the dirt. They physically, mechanically prop open the dense, heavy clumps of earth. The physics here is settled. By inserting a rigid but highly porous organic matrix directly into a heavy, collapsed mineral profile, you immediately and forcefully create macropores. The thick clay can no longer seal against itself because the paper cones are standing directly in the way, acting exactly like structural pillars holding up the ceiling of a collapsing cave. Water that previously sheeted off the hard, baked surface now suddenly finds an open, inviting pathway downward, rapidly tracking along the highly textured, fibrous surface of the buried paper. The dry cellulose immediately begins to absorb the incoming water, swelling slightly in the dark and holding that precious moisture tight against the surrounding, desperately dry soil. This immediate influx of water triggers the second phase of the transformation, shifting the process from pure physical mechanics to intense biological activity. The wedge has successfully opened the door, and now biology will step in to make it permanent. The paper is the bait, and the soil life is the workforce. But the initial physical wedging of the soil clumps is only the very beginning of the timeline. The real, permanent transformation of your garden bed happens progressively over the following 60 days, driven by the biological forces that the wet cellulose inevitably awakens. Let us closely follow the exact chronology of this buried carton as it degrades over time in the dark. At 7 days after burial, the paper carton has absorbed its absolute maximum capacity of moisture from the surrounding earth and passing rains. It softens significantly, losing its rigid crunch, and becomes a damp, highly attractive subterranean sponge. The cellulose fibers literally expand and push outward against the clay. This localized deep soil moisture oasis sends out a powerful, irresistible chemical signal to the surrounding soil fauna. Deep-diving earthworms, tunneling millipedes, and vast networks of microscopic fungi immediately recognize the wet, carbon-rich cellulose as both a premium, safe habitat and an easily digestible food source. They begin to migrate actively toward the paper wedge from all directions. The damp paper acts like a biological magnet in a vast desert of dry clay. At 30 days, the structural integrity of the paper begins to totally fail under the relentless biological assault. The invasive fungi break down the complex carbon bonds, extending microscopic white threads called hyphae through the paper, turning the rigid material into a soft, mushy paste. The fungi secrete specialized enzymes that digest the cellulose exactly where it stands. The earthworms aggressively eat the softened fiber, physically moving vertically and horizontally through the packed dirt to reach the carbon feast. As they travel toward the paper, they literally drill permanent, slime-coated tunnels straight through the severe compaction. They are doing the heavy tilling work that your mechanical tools could not safely achieve, drawn by the bait of the wet carton. The paper serves as a subterranean highway marker, guiding the microscopic workforce exactly to where the soil is most collapsed. They digest the paper and leave behind nutrient-rich castings that bind the clay into aggregates. At 60 days, the physical paper carton is largely gone, consumed by the subterranean workforce and converted into rich worm castings and fungal bodies. But here is the critical, permanent mechanism that changes your garden forever. The void space remains intact. The earthworms and newly venturing plant roots have fully occupied the physical, open channels that the egg carton originally forcefully wedged open. The paper itself dies and vanishes, but the expansive, open architecture it forced into the ground survives, leaving a lasting legacy of aeration. The temporary paper scaffold has been successfully replaced by a permanent biological tunnel network held open by sticky biological glues known as glomalin. The soil is now truly alive. To deploy this powerful wedge effectively, you cannot be passive. You have to place the material directly into the deep problem zone. You do not just lazily lay the cartons on top of the soil beneath some mulch. You take a heavy steel spade, drive it deeply into the absolute most compacted, lifeless section of your garden bed, and forcefully lever the earth open to create a deep, gaping fissure in the clay. You must use your entire body weight to crack the stubborn hardpan. You manually tear the paper egg cartons into jagged, uneven halves or quarters and shove them vertically down into the dark crack, pushing them at least 6 to 8 inches deep into the soil profile. Ensure the cups are facing sideways to maximize the wedging effect. You want the raised cones to push actively against the walls of the crack. Then, you pull the spade out and let the heavy earth violently close back around them, trapping them in the dark. Let us look closely at a detailed cross-section of this specific physical intervention to see the dramatic results. In a cross-section of the untouched, severely compacted soil just a foot away, you see a solid, unbroken, brick-like wall of dense minerals. Plant roots literally turn sideways when they hit it, unable to penetrate the crust. When a heavy summer thunderstorm hits this untreated side, the water stops dead at the surface, refusing to soak in, creating a muddy flood that violently strips the topsoil away. The roots beneath remain bone dry, suffering in the intense heat. But in the cross-section directly where the egg carton was violently buried, you see a profound structural disruption in the earth. Even after the carton has decomposed and vanished at the 60-day mark, the cross-section reveals a dark, distinct vertical seam plunging straight down into the subsoil. The soil aggregates located exactly along this deep seam are visibly larger, darker, and much softer. They are bound securely together by the rich, sticky worm castings and powerful fungal glues left behind by the biological feast. The wide macropores are clearly visible to the naked eye, permanently tracing the exact jagged, chaotic outline of where the folded paper once proudly stood. You have essentially installed a permanent, biologically maintained drainage and aeration pipe directly through the impenetrable hardpan. This is structural modification without mechanical destruction. During that same heavy thunderstorm, the water aggressively rushes down these new biological pipes, bypassing the crust and flooding the deep reserves with life-saving moisture. If you want to start looking at household waste as advanced structural engineering for your soil, make sure to hit subscribe. Next time, we will look at how burying entire unglazed clay pots can automate your watering. The final results of this violent physical wedging and subsequent biological disruption are highly measurable in exactly how the ground handles water during the blistering heat of late summer. Because you have successfully created deep, penetrating, permanent macropores that allow heavy rain to bypass the crusted, compacted surface, the entire moisture profile of that section fundamentally changes. Water is captured deeply, pulled down the ghostly tunnels of the vanished paper cones, stored securely in the newly formed biological aggregates, and heavily shaded by the crust of the earth above. The roots of your plants will aggressively seek out this dark vertical seam, changing their entire morphology to tap into the new underground reservoir. They will grow straight down instead of spreading shallowly across the surface. This deep root growth makes the plants vastly more resilient to sudden droughts, insulating them from the rapidly shifting conditions on the surface. Published research on soil structure modification and the incorporation of coarse organic amendments shows that physically breaking hardpan with organic wedges significantly and permanently alters soil moisture retention curves. A cross-section taken after 60 days typically shows that this single intervention provides up to 18 extra days of vital moisture availability deep in a root zone that previously dried out into a solid concrete block within hours of a rainstorm. The structural shift provided by the cellulose wedges means your garden requires less frequent watering, saving you significant time and resources over the growing season. This is the ultimate goal of soil mechanics, working smarter, not harder. The clay literally transforms into a functioning sponge. You did not have to buy expensive chemical soil conditioners in plastic jugs. You did not have to break your back double-digging the heavy clay, or spend money to rent heavy, destructive tilling machinery that would only shatter the soil structure further. You use the rigid physical shape and the overwhelming biological appeal of molded, recycled cellulose to actively trick the native soil ecosystem into doing the heavy, permanent excavation for you. By burying your trash vertically, you rebuilt the invisible architecture of your garden, transforming a desolate parking lot of clay into a thriving, sponge-like sanctuary for roots and water. You turned a waste product into the ultimate subterranean tool, proving that the solution to compacted soil is not more force, but the right geometry. Take a look at your most difficult garden bed. When the soil dries out, does it crumble easily in your hand, or does it turn into an unbreakable brick? Let me know in the comments below.